All right, we are live. So we're going to be sort of talking about the Society Project, but also it kind of just connects to the real world in a way where it doesn't even have to be known that it's for the Society Project or not. Um, but yeah, so we're going to mostly be talking about abortion, and then if it works out to have a little time to bring in some animal rights, vegan type talk, we will. But let's have the focus be on abortion. So what I think might be a good approach to do here is to have. I always forget. Okay, so you got a name. Actually, both of you use names that aren't your real names for the internet. Yours is just harder to pronounce. So Kava like Java, and then Seer like Sears Tower. Kava Seer. Is
Perfect.
if
Yeah.
Quaid can't remember Kava Seer, do you want him to refer to you as anything specific?
I think I've got
Kava
Uh,
or K?
Cavastier is not too bad. I got
yeah.
Cavasier.
Cavastier.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Okay. So Cavasier. So let's have Cavasier. Just lay out what you think about abortion, and then Quaid, if you just want to
Yeah. Come in and
respond to him and just do a back and forth, because we probably don't need each of you to lay out your position unless Quaid, you want to, if your pro-choice position is different from a standard pro-choice.
Well, let's see how Cavastier's statement goes, and then we'll see.
Go from there. Yeah. Okay.
okay.
Let's hear it.
Perfect. Okay. So I don't come at it from a religious point of view or a you know political point of view. I come at it basically at a scientific point of view. So um, if you're going to analyze life, the distinction between life obviously has to start at some point, right? So to make a distinction between what is human and what is not has to be done quite early on, right? So we have the embryonic stage, and clearly a lot of transformative processes occur there. So there is some leeway for the other argument to be made there, because that's primarily where it's based. I see on the pro-abortion arguments. Tell me if that doesn't fit yours. Um, that's fine, but life, as some people say who are religious, does actually begin at conception, uh, scientifically speaking, and it has its own code that is distinctively human. So you can't claim it's inhuman or it's a fetus or yada yada yada. They're just stages of the human life. Um, so if you're making a societal claim of it's not human, it's not a baby, yada yada, let's just destroy it. Uh, those arguments wouldn't particularly work with that evidence in light. But what could work is if you disregard human rights and have a more hierarchical based argument, then I suppose I would be willing to concede of some sort of alternative argument that I'm not really aware of. But yeah, that's my premise anyway.
Okay. So you said you don't come at it from a religious or
Mm-hmm.
political perspective, but there's still like a value
Yes, there has
under
to be a value because
the value.
within science we favour our young and our species success. I would say that's more of the speciesist part of things, but I'm sorry to
You value
interrupt.
you value human life,
Yes,
and they so at any stage. So even at the moment of conception, it is technically, semantically, a human life.
yes,
Therefore, it is worthy of protection under the law. That's what I understand
yeah. That's
your
that's
position
pretty much the argument.
to be. Right. Okay. Well, I'll just say that my position is that I guess for me, I used to be a traditionalist Catholic. I used to be radically pro-life. I'm not anymore. I I value for me the value really begins with sentience, and
I would
I
argue that too. Yeah.
I apply that consistently. Even as a vegan, I know we're gonna maybe get into the vegan stuff later, but it's not like I value an animal fetus more than a human fetus. I mean, sentience is the line, not species for me, and that's going to cross. That's why there's a lot of crossover between these two discussions, right? So I am pro-choice until um, we can have a reasonable expectation of sentience. So I don't believe that we should be terminating any kind of fetus, preborn child that can feel pain. I think it's wrong to inflict unnecessary suffering. Sometimes it might be necessary, and I always think there should be exceptions, no matter what. I think should be the case normally, if there's a threat to the life of the mother, if there's rape or some other extreme circumstance, I think you have to have exceptions all the way up to birth. But setting those cases aside, the line for me is sentience. Now, there's a lot of differing opinions on when sentience begins. Unfortunately, it's not. There's not an agreed scientific consensus on when does a fetus no, right? When does it start feeling pain? According to what I've read, and maybe you've read different. According to what I've read, somewhere between 20 and 24 weeks is when fetus can feel pain, and most abortions take place prior to that. I think somewhere 93 to 96% of abortions take place long before that window, and that's fine with me. That's why I would describe myself as almost entirely pro-choice, because that's when most of the abortions are taking place. I don't see any good reason to restrict the bodily autonomy of women, to protect an entity that cannot feel pain, cannot experience pain and suffering. So that's kind of like my basic pro-choice position. I don't disagree with you that it's a human life, but that is not sufficient for me to take away the freedom of a human adult who actually can experience pain and suffering and oppression. We're kind of weighing interest here. So, if you've got a fully grown human adult that can experience all those things versus a fetus that can't experience anything really, I'm going to be on the side of that fully grown sentient human adult in that case. So that's why I'm pro-choice.
I think that's a good distinction. I mean, many people I've spoken to don't typically have that stance, because I hear a lot of people just completely reject the statement of humanity within anything in embryonic stages, or pre-24 weeks, for example. But I mean, I would agree with partially most of the things you've stated. Like, for instance, I would put sentience over non-sentience any time of the day. But for me, the distinction is drawn between not just the sentience, but we all have to come from non-sentience anyhow. So it would be sort of a contradictory statement to say anything that isn't sentient shouldn't be regarded with the same protection, because we all had to have come from that point. But I do think that, if I think a lot of people make the argument of if you were in a bed and someone was next to you and you were tied to them, this type of argument. I've known many people to make this comparison, and I think that type of argument has more exploration than simply just bringing up consciousness. Because if I was a fully formed male and you were a fully formed male and we were next to each other, and I was told I could save my own life by taking his organs or yada yada, would I do it? Probably, yeah. I think most people would. From a
if I may interrupt for a second, it sounds like you're kind of referring to what I think it's called the violinist argument.
Yes.
Right? And in that, that's one of those scenarios where, look, when it comes to preserving your own life, many things are justified. Like, even as a vegan, I've always said that veganism is not a suicide pact. If you have to eat animal flesh to survive, you're justified in doing that. So if we're talking about a scenario where an abortion will save your life, I think most people would err on the side of, okay, it's permissible then. But then it's more of a question of, well, what if there's not an immediate threat to your life? I mean, all pregnancies carry some risk, but let's just say, as far as we know, there's no complications. It's just 9 months of your life where another entity is completely dependent on you, feeding off of you, um, uh, using your body as an incubator. Are you obligated to allow that, even if it's not a direct threat to your life? And I would still say no. I would still say that there's a principle of bodily autonomy where you have a right to assert that interest of bodily autonomy over the interest of a being that doesn't have that, can't experience that. I don't think that fetus has any inherent right to occupy the womb of its mother. I think the mother has every right to, and then we can also consider, like, people will say just put it up for adoption if you don't want to care for it after it's born. I mean, that's not always an easy option either. Once you've carried a child to term for 9 months, I mean, obviously, as a man, I can't fully understand that, but from what I, can kind of gather, it's not easy to just give a child away after 9 months. Maybe it is for some people, maybe it isn't for others, but still, does a fetus have a right to occupy a woman's womb for, let's say 20 to 24 weeks before, at which point I would say, now that I can feel pain, okay, then we have another consideration. But up to that point,
I would say
right?
Sorry about that.
No, go ahead. I was done. That was it.
I would say the distinction of pain is like a reasonable objection, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't judge anyone for saying such things, but for me, I feel from a science point of view, it is more of an emotional, objection to abortion. For example, there are many people who are pro-abortion that don't care. I know you're different, obviously. I mean, I appreciate the levels of either pro-abortion or anti-abortion arguments, because there are different variables. But for me, like, I would say that, yeah, it feels pain at this point, but it doesn't feel pain here. Doesn't really take away from its inherent protection. I would say it gives it more protection when it's feeling pain. I would definitely argue in favor of that point of yours. But I would say even before that, it is not a fully formed human. And yeah, if the mother does want to get rid of it, I wouldn't argue against necessarily the action of getting rid of a baby if the mother wishes, but I would say for doing so, there should be some repercussion if we do say all human life is to be protected, and we do have a scientific point.
Well, I guess when we talk about pro-life versus pro-choice, there are people who will say that I'm personally against abortion, I'm personally pro-life, but I'm politically pro-choice. And it almost sounds like that's where you're going. Like, on a personal level, you believe that the fetus has some value and is worthy of some protection, but what are you willing to mandate politically, I guess, is really the question. I know you said you didn't come at it from a political point of view, but these are positions that have political implications. So I guess for me is, you'd be personally pro-life all day. I don't really care. But when you start saying, I think women should be prosecuted for having abortions at any point, when you start saying things like, I think we need to ban the birth control, we need to ban not birth control pills, but the abortion pill, which they're debating here in the U.S. right now. There are some states that have already tried to ban it. I think it's kind of pending right now to see how things are going to turn out. But when you start saying things like that, I don't know if those are your positions. You can clarify that for me. But when you start talking about all the applications, that's where we're going to have a conflict. Because I don't really care if you're personally pro-life, but where are you? Where are you on, what those repercussions should be? What do you think those should be?
I think there should be definitely, a hearing about it at least. There shouldn't be just arbitrary lawmakers who come down and say, the woman should suffer years in prison and these types of things. It should be something we all speak about, but I do believe that there should be some level of punishment. Now, that's just my personal front, as you've identified. But when it comes to the...
I think the punishment should be for, let's say, a first trimester, first 3 months
I'd say, yeah, I'd say as it goes up, it should be more, because as we both agree, definitely human life is more precious as its experience grows. I think that's true too. I
So,
think you
so,
definitely.
so what would you say the punishment should be for an abortion that takes place before 12 weeks, before 24 weeks? Like, at what point are you willing to start imposing criminal penalties on women and doctors and abortion providers? At what point are you willing to start saying, okay, now the law needs to step in? And
I wouldn't punish doctors per se if it's done in an actual clinical setting. For example, some abortions are necessary. Some do have to be done to save the life of the mother if she wishes. In that scenario, I think they're definitely valid. So I don't think the doctor should really be scrutinized in that setting. But I think the woman, for example, may be fines if it's a very low stage of life, because I think you can't really incentivize abortion. I think as a species, incentivizing abortion mainly just makes us lose out on human life. We may have extra workforce, extra academics. We really don't know what we could lose from the act of abortion. How many Einsteins, is a true statement I've heard from Christians, for example, and I would agree with their statements that there is a lot lost.
Let me ask you this, though. I mean, do you think that a woman is obligated to carry a little Einstein in her womb for the benefit of everybody else?
No,
I
don't.
think.
I don't think.
I mean, I get some of these considerations that you bring up. Maybe we're aborting the next Einstein. But the question for me is always going to be, well, is an individual woman obligated to surrender her bodily autonomy so we get the next Einstein? On the other hand, what if she's carrying the next Hitler?
Yeah, well, that's a valid point. Yes.
We should force her to get. I don't think we should force her to get an abortion, but she's carrying the next Hitler. Any more than I think we should force her to give birth.
Yes.
To the next Einstein. I think I come back to that issue of bodily autonomy, and I just want to know where you stand on bodily autonomy, because a lot of pro-life discourse doesn't really talk about the mother, the woman, and so what is your view on that?
For the mother, I mean, it's a mixed bag, because wherever you step in this sort of domain about the mother, there's quite a few eggshells. But I am willing. I'm pretty careless to just go for it. I'm quite honest with what I say. For women, I think generally speaking, it shouldn't really be if they should have abortions. I think it more should be, why should they have abortions, right? So as we made the concession before, that it should be perfectly appropriate for a woman to go get an abortion if it's her life at risk, right? But if you're just having an abortion because you had a one-night stand with John down the lane, I think that is a clear level of civic irresponsibility for a society, and I think it could have easily been avoided to destroy that human life. And I think that act itself is what primarily should be either judged or inspected for the modern age, because there's so many happening. I think without having some discourse about it, it's just going to grow and grow, and there's going to be resentment on both sides of the argument.
Okay, so and I know in if you follow online discourse, that's the kind of example that comes up the most. The slut who goes out and meets a bunch of guys and has multiple, and I would say to a certain extent that's kind of like the Reagan welfare queen myth. I mean, I'm using a lot of U.S. examples, and I don't know if you're living in the U.S. or what. I
understand. Don't worry. I keep up with a lot of U.S. politics. I have lots of friends and such.
Yeah, there's certain kind of myths like that. I'm not saying that person doesn't exist, but I don't think, if you look at the statistics, why do women get abortions? I mean, it's almost always, in the majority of cases, it's because they're not financially or psychologically ready for parenthood. It's not just because they want to go have fun and go on their next vacation or something like that. There's an image of that builds up in people's minds. That they're just irresponsible sluts who can't keep their legs closed. That's not the reality. but do you realize that a majority of abortions are had by women who are already mothers? They may or may not be married in a relationship still with the father, but there are majority of abortions are had by women who already have children, they're already raising children, they can't afford another one. Um,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
so,
I've read that statistic.
so that like I think there's already a social stigma around just having abortions on a whim, even though. Go ahead. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
sorry. If you had something else to say to finish, you should. I didn't want to cut you guys off, but I did have a couple challenges for each of you guys because I like to play devil's advocate and throw out some questions.
Go
And
for it.
okay, and then in a
There
second,
we go.
we have another one of the group senators that's going to come in and join the talk. But okay, so because of something I heard Quaid ask you about the women,
Yeah.
I did want to check on something because there is this thought that that
Did you just say a thought?
what there's this thought that not that kind of thought thought that right wing people want to control women's bodies and Christians want to control women in this whole thing, and being a very pro freedom and rights and even bodily autonomy person that's also leaning pro-life. I know that's not the case for myself, but I'm just curious, is there anything, and there's nothing wrong with being open if you have views that one might call sexist or whatever. Is there anything that you view that like women are lesser than or should have their bodies controlled in any way outside of protecting what you view as a human? Like if separate from abortion, is there anything where you would say a woman can't control her body in some way legally?
I mean, none less than men, I suppose. Like, men don't have the right to go to, a holiday home every 5 minutes. During wartime, women probably get that just for free. There is some distinction between men and women that is just biological, social, hierarchical. Um,
But is there anything
but
that's
no,
not
there's
harming
not.
somebody that you think a woman shouldn't be allowed to do with her body? For one example that is kind of complicated, and I don't know exactly where I stand, but do you think that like if a
Oh,
woman
right. Yeah, I see your point.
wants to have her tubes tied or her an ablation in her uterus to never have kids again, even if she's like 25 or something like that, and just as an adult, are you okay with women making any choices that harms no one else?
I think tubes tied is more responsible, I would say, than abortion because there's no life being harmed there, regardless if it feels. You see, so that's my approach to it. It's more of a causal argument.
Okay.
You can't have feelings and thoughts and experiences if you don't come from a non-thought experience and position. That's just how life progresses. Um,
Gotcha.
so you can't really throw out all life that doesn't have a certain level of experience, right? Because then we just don't progress. So from a scientific point of view, it's a little redundant for me to hear those arguments, but I wouldn't say that argument is without merit to certain levels of life. For example, if I had a little boy, which I do, and I had a new son or daughter coming about, and my wife was going to die, and she was like, I think I'm going to save my own life, for example. I would say, yeah, go for saving your own life because that's your decision at that point, and your life is clearly more of value because you've got more experience and etc. But that's truly a me or them scenario, and I don't think many women who go through abortions have the me or them scenario. You can say they have poverty issues, but no one forced them to have sex. Some do, obviously, the small percentage, but
Okay.
Gotcha.
that's just not a
Well,
responsible adult, I would say.
gotcha. I'm going to
I,
pause you there, and I see that Quaid wants to say something to that.
Yeah, sure.
Are you okay with holding off and saying that in a sec, or do you want to do it now?
no, you go ahead. That's fine.
Okay. I just had a couple challenges for you, and then I wanted Isaac to come in and share his thoughts, and you guys can all kind of go back and forth. But okay, so for Quaid, you made a comment about sentience being impacting you similar to how it does with animals, and so you don't value a human non-sentient fetus higher or lower than an animal non-sentient fetus. It's all about the sentience. If we had a machine that could detect sentience, so this is a wild hypothetical. If we had a machine that could detect sentience, so we are able to start figuring out like, oh, okay, so on average, human fetuses were sentient around 20 weeks. Let's say we knew that the youngest age of human sentience was 18 weeks, and we can make decisions based off this. Well, what if there was a strange anomaly where there was like 1 in a million babies would be born where their sentience hasn't arrived until they're like 3 months old, like already born. And so they're kind of there, they're human, they're like continuing to develop, but we can know with this machine that they have no sense of feeling. They can't suffer, they can't feel joy, they can't sense things, they can't, if they're touched or whatever, they can't feel that. Would you say that because your value is sentience, that it would be okay to do away with that human, or even in an animal case, an animal that has 0 sentience?
But by do away with, you mean just kill on a whim, or
Kill, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know. We don't really need to go into like machines and weird scenarios. I mean, there are children who are born missing the equipment they need for, what we would think of as sentience, and like they don't live very long. So I don't know about 3 years. But then there are lesser degrees of that. There are fully grown adults who are comatose, who are brain damaged, who are for whatever reason they have a very low sentience. So not at a level that we would consider like normal human sentience. So I mean, we don't need to invent.
Well, the reason I invent the hypothetical is because like with a comatose patient, you can say that they had sentience and they had an experience in life, and then now they don't have sentience and they might get it back. I'm just like, I wasn't sure how you might view something that never was sentient. It's at this point 3 months alive after birth. It's as sentient as a rock.
Let me try to give you a more direct answer here then. When we're talking about abortion, we're almost always talking about balancing rights. We're talking about 2 conflicting sets of rights, an interest, the interest of the fetus, the interest of the mother, the rights of the fetus, the rights of the mother. And I would still just carry that same framework over to a born child that didn't have sentience. It would depend on the conflict of rights. And if there's no conflict of rights and interests, then no, I don't think it's good to just exterminate a life, even a non-sentient life, like no reason. But if there's a legitimate conflict of interest where somebody's life is going to be severely impaired by the continued existence of this non-sentient being, well then, yeah, I do think the interests and rights of the sentient adult would take precedence there. So I would just carry that framework over.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then you made a comment about ready for parenthood. Would you say that in a case where a woman wanted an abortion, where if she was not ready for parenthood and therefore could get the abortion, if the person admitted that is not the case, they just want to abort just because they don't want the experience of giving birth, they didn't get the abortion earlier, so this would be like a late term abortion, some case where it's late enough but you would still be accepting of, if the person didn't want to be a parent, that they could abort it, I guess I'm trying to figure out how much you think that element truly affects something, the not wanting. Is there any stage of development where there's sentience of a fetus inside of a woman where you would say this is past the stage of just a random abortion, but not wanting to be a parent would be enough reason to abort, like 24 weeks, 25 weeks, somewhere in there?
Well, okay, I want to be clear on what I think you're asking me here. So you're asking me if not wanting to be a parent is sufficient reason to get an abortion after 24 weeks. after sin.
Yeah. Or is there ever a point where that argument is an argument that will make or break something for you on the topic of abortion? Or is it kind of just an added benefit of abortion?
Well, I mean, look, on the whole, I don't think that a child who is born to parents who don't want it is going to, the chances of having a good life are significantly lower. Now, we never know how some things are going to turn out for an individual. But I mean, just going statistically speaking, I would think that wanted children are going to thrive and unwanted children are going to suffer more. So I think it would depend on the degree, like to which the degree of loathing for parenthood that we're talking about here. Like, but by the way, when I said like not ready for parenthood, I was mostly thinking of like, we're not ready financially, socially to integrate a new life into our family, into the world, into society. That's what I meant before when I was talking about it. But if we're talking on a psychological level, yeah, if you're not but that's the thing though. I will also say though, that's a decision. You've got to figure that out before 24 weeks, I think. There's something, I do think there is something wrong if, you're at 24 weeks or 30 weeks, and then you decide, I don't want to do this, that I think is a problem. And I would be less sympathetic to. Like, that's something that you should have thought out before. When you were pregnant from how many months, and like if your financials are good, you're actually ready financially and socially to bring a life into the world. But now you just decide, I don't think I want to do this at 30 weeks, and there's no health complications, there's no defects, anything like that. It's just a pure changing your mind on the whole parenthood thing. Well, at that point, I'd say maybe think about adoption, then maybe think about putting the child up for adoption and having the child, because you're talking about this. Now you are talking about inflicting pain on a sentient being for what I don't think is a great reason. And I do think that I wouldn't want a doctor to sign off on that. I don't think that's good.
Okay. Okay. So Isaac's here, and Isaac is also one of the senators for our group. And Isaac, I actually don't know your stance on this topic. So I'm going to have Isaac share his stance on this topic, and then whoever disagrees with Isaac the most can challenge him to something. And then just a reminder for you guys, I don't know, Kavasir is new to the group, so he might not have actually voted on the abortion topic yet. But currently in our society project, abortions are illegal at 20 weeks. And at first they were illegal at 12 weeks because there was a higher percentage of votes initially. Because there's a study called Rethinking Fetal Pain or something like that. And it found that that fetuses on average feel pain around 12 weeks. And but anyways, right now it's 20 weeks, and we'll probably put it to another vote at some point because this is probably one of the most extreme topics out there. But we have a handful of people in our 30 senators, that a handful that think abortion should be fine all the way up until the day before birth, a handful that think there should be no abortion even on day one of conception, and then a bunch in the middle. So I think conversations like this will be interesting ways to share information to maybe sway people that are kind of on the fence in areas. But anyways, Isaac, what is your stance on abortion right now?
I'm generally not against it. I think that and my position is purposely vague because for me it's really hard to justify the extreme views of this one. Either like full on, abortion should be always legal up until the day before birth, or the opposite. I think like those are really difficult to justify. And so I think that it should be somewhere in the middle. And so that's about where I'm at. I voted for the 20 weeks. So, and because I do think that, the closer it gets to birth, the more disturbing it is. And the earlier on, the less disturbing it is for me. So that's generally what I have. I don't really think that there's anything that we should necessarily correlate it. It's like sentience or something. I don't care about that. Like I don't know what exactly it should be based off on like what objective metric. For me, I just even a baby that is born, I'm not entirely convinced on its ability to suffer in the same way as of like an adult human. And so I just don't value a baby suffering as much as an adult human suffering, if that makes sense. So, but yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm and I definitely am, pretty flexible here. So you could convince me, probably not towards one of the extremes, but to move it up or down a couple weeks.
It sounds
I-
like you'd be more likely to be moved toward the extreme of toward like a higher gestational age if you're not even convinced much about suffering of a born baby than you would be able to be convinced the other direction. But yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, for me, there's still a concern with like human rights, that where the suffering doesn't matter to me. So because I do think that plays a part of it. But if it was just based off of the ability to suffer, for me, it would even be probably like the day that before it was born, I'd be okay with it. But at that point, I do, and I do think that there are situations where it's justified, the day before it's born to do it, but not for just like financial reasons or whatever. I think like if there's any sort of a health issue, then that can be completely fine, even past the 20 weeks or whatever. But for like no other reason, like it's a completely healthy baby and you're just doing it for financial reasons, I think that around 20 weeks seems appropriate for that.
Can I interject here? Because I have something that you made me realize, which is interesting. Apparently the baby also has. I'm joking, but sorry about that. I was going to say, do you think that view, because I know many people who share that view, could be in part response to emotion? Because I think a lot of people, when a baby gets close to being born, they have more of a disgust element in it because of the possibility, the baby may be born in hurt, and it's a bit more emotionally built up, so to speak, both in, if you're a parent or societal expectations. Do you think that is something that has any weight to it? Do you guys want to talk about that? I think it's just an interesting perspective.
For me, I think that is absolutely the case, and I'm not ashamed of that, because I think that, like I said, like objectively, I think the arguments are very, very close, and so for me, it's just kind of trying to choose a reasonable position that makes both sides relatively it's a place to compromise, and then I think that emotion, when it's when two things are like objectively equivalent, I think that you kind of have to default to emotion for where you go from there. So
Maybe repeat the question one more time.
Yeah, I suppose it's reasonable as well. I would say it's commendable to bear on the line of instinct and emotion. But you want me to repeat it?
Yeah, could you repeat
Okay.
the question?
Yeah. So, do you think when we get closer to the birthing stage, near the end of pregnancy, that people become more icky or disgust with how they feel about it due to the emotional baggage, maybe, or build-up of the pregnancy coming to the end? Because it's a fully formed baby pretty much near the end of pregnancy, and that may play a part in how people feel about it, I think.
I think the more recognizably human the fetus is, the more people hesitate and maybe find more revulsion and disgust at the idea of harming it. I do think that plays a role, absolutely.
That's good to know. Just something worth putting out. I wouldn't say anyone is lesser for like Isaac, for example. I wouldn't say you're lesser for
Well,
feeling.
we're not robots,
Yeah, exactly. We have those emotions for a reason.
Well, so one thing that I think would be interesting, or is interesting, I think usually people look at pro-life and pro-choice as opposites, which they kind of are, but they're I think they both have the same good intention, outside of maybe people that are basing their decisions on religion. No offense to people that are religious, but just basing it on that. If looking at everybody else, I'm guessing that if there was a way to that wouldn't be bad for the health of a human to just start growing humans in like incubators and not inside of women. Now I know that there's probably many benefits to doing things how things are naturally done, but just looking at a hypothetical where all humans just take the sperm, take the egg, they go to a facility, and then the humans grown there. I think obviously no pro-life people would say let's just make women's lives suck if there's no babies inside them, and then pro-choice people wouldn't, they'd be glad that women aren't being bothered. So there would be some kind of a question if the owner of the sperm and the egg wanted to terminate at some point once the conception started, if they want, even though it wasn't inside of somebody. But it would pretty much remove the entire argument, because for me, and people might have heard me say this in abortion talks, I care more about bodily autonomy than almost anything in existence. If I came across a dying person on the street and all I had to do to save their life was pluck out one beard hair, I don't think I should legally have to. If that was known and their life would be saved and I don't do it and they die, I think I should be shamed. Everybody should not want to be my friend, but I shouldn't legally have to. And even that being said, I think it's such a complicated issue that if my bodily autonomy was affected based on somebody else's life that's inside me, I think it'd be a wildly different situation. So
I'm very close to that as well. Like I'm always on the fence about whether to intervene because of the stances of autonomy. Because a lot of people think I contradict myself with, being for life rather than going against women's autonomy. But I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive. Like I don't think that to be pro-life is to be against women's autonomy. I know there's definitely a line there to be made, but I don't think they are the same thing, because it's a different life in a body that's willingly, well, not all the time, but 99% of the time the woman is willingly accepted the.
Well, that's where I got to say though, that's where I was going to step in before about this idea that, like, unless we're talking about forcible rape, that we're always talking about a situation where there was full consent to sex and pregnancy and parenthood and all the stuff that follows from that. I just don't buy that. I think women are pressured into sex in many ways that we don't legally define as rape, but all the same, there's the threat of, well, if you don't do this, I'll leave you. If you don't do this, our relationship is going to change. Things like that. I mean, there are all kinds of situations where men pressure and manipulate women into sex. That we wouldn't call it rape, but still, at the very least, that means that the man bears as much responsibility. I don't like the idea of four guys sitting around talking about these women who just have sex and it's all on them. Okay, men have a role to play in this, and
I agree with that for sure.
Yeah. Fewer abortions, then more men need to keep it in their pants.
For sure, yeah. I think men and women need to. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. I think men and women do need the same level of reproductive responsibility. Like, absolutely, I don't think one takes away from the other, really. I think if women are more responsible, I think men will follow suit. I think that's usually the cultural case. I mean, if we look back into the 50s when things started to change, before then, men had to go through a lot of hoops to gain attention of a woman and gain the time of a woman, because there was a lot more standards then. There was a lot more risk then before science and culture adapted to what we have today. And I think our culture now is just, I don't know, I would say lost or doesn't know what it is yet. And that's maybe why we have those, discrepancies in lawmaking about abortion and things like this. But I think you've got a valid point. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I
disagree with what you said.
I think that I would still hold my same stance even if it was the men that got pregnant. I do feel that it's a sucky situation. No, I don't even know exactly what my stance is. I feel pretty firm on my stances of almost anything, more so than I do abortion, because it's the worst of both worlds. I mean, I think people need their freedoms more than anything. I think freedom of speech, freedom of action, freedom, all the freedoms. Any adults making their choices should do absolutely anything they want to do that doesn't harm another person. And so having this conflict where I'm deciding at what point, because the other most important thing is being part of a society that protects your life, making it so if somebody kills you, they're going to go to jail for life or whatever, to try to have a deterrent from people harming each other. And so this topic is just right there on the fence of both of those, figuring out where that life is and when a life matters. And so, but yeah, it sucks that it happens to fall on the woman, and I have no claim of, I don't think there'd be anything wrong with the society that maybe acts upon the ways that the Cavasier is saying that they should, like maybe some modest, wholesome, whatever. But at the same time, I don't even I have nothing against polygamy, and there can be groups of 10 people having all the gay sex and the straight sex, and I'll do all the things. I really don't care. Any adults can make any choices they want. It is a bummer, the outcome, that it seems to negatively affect women. But let's say you had some weird situation where let's imagine herpes being a bigger deal than it is, and imagine that women could carry it but could never experience it. They could just give it to somebody else. And so if a woman's having sexual activities with a man, and then the man has the herpes, and then it's like, oh man, I'm so pissed I have this, and the person that gave it to me doesn't even have to experience it, because women don't experience it. They can just give it. I think it's still fair to say that if that person didn't want to give it, they could have been more careful with who their partners were and that kind of thing. And it doesn't mean that she's not equally at fault as he is, but he made a decision that led to a certain outcome that if he would have made a different decision, it would have not led to that outcome. So same with a woman and pregnancy. Obviously, she can't get pregnant without the sperm, but if she didn't accept the sperm in her, then she couldn't have.
I like that we're comparing a fetus. I like that we're comparing pregnancy to herpes.
Well, just anything. I'm trying to think of
I was going to say that.
I'm trying to think of a near realistic example.
I have an example
of something that could exist
it's an imposition and invasion of bodily autonomy, whether it's by a virus or by a fetus. I mean, we are kind of talking about, and there are pro-choice people who will put it in those terms. I mean, it's kind of like a disease. It does carry significant health risks. Pro-lifers downplay the risks of pregnancy all the time, but no, pregnancy does pose a substantial health risk to all women, and some more than others.
A lot of women can be sick, for sure. Yeah.
And so, I have a problem with the state forcing women to bear that risk if they don't want to bear that risk. But like I said before, I think the time to decide whether or not you want to bear that risk, you've got, what we said right now, 20 weeks, 24 weeks. I think that's a reasonable amount of time to decide, do I want to bear this risk? And if you did, by that time, if you haven't figured it out, well, then I think that's a problem. But of course, there are risks involved, and that has to be part of it too. I don't think anyone should be obligated to take on risks like that against their will.
I think this is a topic that is so rarely talked about in detail that it makes it hard for people to really come up with their stances. For example, like what you're talking about, the risks that women have to take. The thing that will convince me to sway my opinion on this will probably be something like understanding the risks more, and like knowing if there's this likelihood of death or this likelihood of this kind of illness or depression or whatever that pregnancy can lead to, that will probably be the biggest impact on me. But, oh man, what was I just had a thought that just left me. Oh, and it was a good one too. Well, I guess while I'm thinking about that, I was going to bring to the Cavasier, you view life at conception. Do you are you at all leaning towards being against something like the pill or something like
I have
morning after?
some things with the pill. Like, for example, not just because it's against life, not just because of that, but it does harm women quite a lot in terms of hormonal and mental health. So I do have some other reasons why I dislike the pill, but you know, I did want to bring up one thing Quaid sort of alluded to before. He he brought up something good, which was loose women. At the original part of the argument. I think even loose women should be allowed to be as loose as they want. Like I don't think sleeping around is a bad thing, and I don't think that necessitates being punished. But I think if you're gonna sleep around, you have to know that it carries that risk. So you have to do more to prevent the risk of pregnancy if you really don't want to be pregnant. So I just think that give one example: prostitutes. A lot of prostitutes don't get pregnant as much as some other women because they know the risks. A lot more than regular women do than a prostitute does. So I'm not really against that or against boxing in women, for example, like we discussed. But it is an icky situation, right? Because Quaid's got a point. You do have a big responsibility to not step on women's autonomy and rights and these things.
And if I may interject, well, I wanted to ask you, Kavasir, like, so where are you from? What country are you in?
Oh, United Kingdom, yeah. So
Okay.
England.
So, okay, and in the EU.
No, we left.
I know you're not in the EU, but I'm saying I'm using them as another example. So in
Right.
the UK, in the EU, in Canada, in Australia, in the Anglosphere, in other countries, there are social safety nets. There are all kinds of social services available to support women. That's why, like in the United States, we had people trying to bring up Europe's abortion laws, and I know they're different country by country, but they're actually a little more strict than what we had under Roe versus Wade. People will bring that up and say, well, we just want what Europe has. But what Europe also has is, for most people, free healthcare. There are more social services in place. I know in some countries, I think like France, and I'm sure other countries too, there's more childcare available. There's maternity leave. There's paid maternity leave that lasts for months and months. I think in some countries, even over a year. There are all kinds of supports in place. So the more social supports there are in place, the less sympathetic I become to an abortion that takes place after a certain number of weeks. Not to say that I think anyone should be thrown in jail or anything. I'm just talking about on the scale of like what I'm willing to fight for, what I'm willing to go to the mat for. We don't have that in the United States. When here, our national motto might as well be "fuck you, you're on your own." That's how we govern here. And we also have the most extreme pro-life faction, probably in any developed country. You'd probably have to look at like Africa, which is also partially our fault, our evangelical missionaries going over there with the pro-life extremism. But you have to look to other countries to see a country more that has less support for pregnant women and more severity in their pro-life faction that wants to criminalize and outlaw this. So I try to consider that as well. And I think if you're looking at this from the outside, if you're in a country where there's actually some social safety net for women, you might have a little less sympathy. I could understand.
Sure, yeah. That's
Whereas
definitely true.
if you're here in the United States, I want all those things in the U.S. too. I absolutely do. I wish we had social democracy, but we don't. And so Roe versus Wade was basically kind of the concession, like, okay, we're not going to give you free healthcare, no paid maternity leave, but you can get an abortion, and well, I don't think that's a great thing.
That's a good point.
But at least it was there, and now it's gone for women in many states. I mean, here in California, where I am, still legal. Blue states still legal, but in more states around the country now that it's no longer federal, women don't even have that. They're even now in states like Texas and other places, they won't even let women travel out of state for abortions. They're stopping them on the highways. So what bodily autonomy goes just beyond the pregnancy. It goes like, now you can't travel. if you're
I
pregnant.
think
If you're pregnant and you travel, we're gonna make sure that you're not, able to get out of the state and go have an abortion. I mean, we're reaching now police state levels.
Have there been a lot of cases of that, or is it like a specific state that's doing it?
I'd have to pull it up, but in Texas, I saw they were going to start having checkpoints on the highways.
Interesting. Okay. And
think
so
we've
if somebody could move out of the state, and then then that is what that is. But if they are current citizens of that state, then they can't leave if they're pregnant. That's a wild.
yeah, I've read that. I've read that. I've heard about that myself.
Interesting. Okay.
We're not quite there.
Um,
People
I
who
would-
want-
Oh, me and my wife are watching Handmaid's Tale right now, and I was talking about how silly it is that people compare it to real life or whatever. But this element sounds a little scary of stopping people in states. I have a hypothetical I want to bring to Isaac, and then I'm also going to ask Quaid the same hypothetical, so you can hear it as I'm saying it to Isaac. But okay. So imagine that we have that situation I was talking about where basically, let's just say everybody agrees on it, and babies are in factory, like in like a facility that they're not growing inside the mother anymore. You go, you take your sperm, your egg, it's in an incubator, and they're growing in there. Now, in this hypothetical, just to make it easier to determine how we view the fetus. Let's say resources are aplenty. Nobody has to work. Everybody has all the money, the food in the world. There's an endless amount of people that want babies that can't have babies. So like adoption, people would love to have all the extra babies. We're not going to have too many babies in this hypothetical. If a couple came and gave their sperm and their egg, and conception was made, and then between conception and 40 weeks before that baby is taken out of the incubator, do you think there's any acceptable time to terminate if the parents came in like 2 weeks later? So it's only it's still just a handful of cells, a zygote, and they say, we changed our mind, we don't want it, and even though you could let it keep growing and then give it up for adoption, we'd prefer not to have our something with our DNA out there. We just don't want it anymore, and we don't value an embryo at 2 weeks or whatever. Is there a certain cutoff when there's not a woman's body involved at all if the resources are aplenty and there's people that want to adopt?
Before you answer, Kavasir, I just wanted to tell you, I'm going to step out real quick. I'll be right back.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. This one's for Isaac though. So
Right.
Isaac, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think in this case, I think I'm full pro-life here. I don't think that there's any acceptable reason where you would want to take that life, because I guess like the only thing I can think of is if there's some sense of ownership over the sperm and the egg, which I'd have to think about that one, whether or not they have that, and at what point they like stop owning it. But yeah, I think that in this case, especially if there's plenty of people to adopt and stuff, and it's posing no risk to anyone, and they can still have the ability to just completely walk away, and just that baby just has no impact on their lives, then I don't think they should have any control over that baby. So
Gotcha.
yeah, so I think
Yeah,
it should
no,
be
and
pro-life.
And the ownership element it's important to think about. I would say that once there's something that we would, if we call it a human, which I would, it might be a human that doesn't have value, or a human that doesn't have consciousness, or various different things. But once we call it a human, I would say you can either, once that baby is a baby and you can take it home, you have your whatever we call ownership over your children, or you can sign your rights away if you're in a society that has like adoption options, which this hypothetical does. And so I would say that the ownership of the sperm and the egg wouldn't really matter in that case once the human exists. But yeah, so let's go to Quaid. What would you say? Is there did you hear the whole thing about if somebody wanted to come in at 2 weeks and terminate it or whatever?
Well, okay. So this kind of, I think, plays into the idea of like the commodification of life. I think the very like premise of your question is kind of assuming that like a society where we're all just entitled to grow a life, take a life, on a whim as we choose. And I've got problems even with that scenario. So yeah, I mean, from the framework I established before, I would have to kind of just say, well, I guess there's no real problem with doing that. But at the same time, I would question the whatever led to them to be able to do that in the first place. Like, why do we have a system where you can just order up a child on demand and then decide, now I don't want it anymore? I think that is a problem. I think that desensitizes us to, the overall value of life itself. It's one thing when we're talking about an organic pregnancy, when we're talking, I mean, most of the time when we're talking about abortions, we are talking about, situations where it's justifiable. I mean, there are some situations where maybe it's not, but from everything I've read, most of the abortions that take place, they take place for relatively good reasons. And what you brought up here is kind of like I don't think there's a good reason. It's just we don't want it anymore. And I kind of said before, I don't think that that's a great reason. Now, but if it's not,
well, and that's why I like hypotheticals, because I think it's important to figure out where that reason is. So right now, what I did is I removed all the reason, and then we can add in reasons, and I think we can come to an agreement, because at some point I'll say a tiny little zygote is not worth a woman losing her life or whatever, and then we'll figure things out as we go. But so my follow-up question would be, if in the future, instead of what we're talking about, where they can be grown in a facility, if they can be grown in a facility, but they can also be grown in people. And let's say a woman gets pregnant and it's not through rape. She just decided to have sex, and she's 3 weeks pregnant, and the doctor could pull that embryo out and put it, and then finish the growing in a facility. But it's inside her currently. Does the fact that it's inside her give her the right to terminate it at various different stages? Or if we have the capability of pulling it out and growing it in a facility, in a hypothetical where we have endless resources and all the people that want to adopt, would you keep the same stance that she shouldn't be able to terminate it? She can just have it removed and grown in a facility?
I would say, I don't know why you would want to terminate it if you could just have it. I mean, we're talking about an invasive procedure either way.
Let's just say that she doesn't want her DNA out there. Like, she doesn't want to feel like I have a child that I created from my egg. And I don't want, if it's out in the world, I'm going to feel like I want to own it, but I don't actually want to own it.
Yeah, here's a principle I would go with on that. Like whenever I have discussions about, raising children, child abuse, what's appropriate and what's not, one of my foundational views is that children are not the property of their parents. Okay, so an unborn fetus can have a conflict of rights and interests with its mother. Okay, and I think the mother can win that most of the time. But that being said, a conflict of rights and interests does not in any way imply that the mother is the owner, or the father is the owner of the child. I don't believe that you can claim ownership of another being because it shares your DNA. Okay, like, first of all, it's not her DNA. It is the fetus's DNA. It's its own unique DNA. She contributed to it, but it's not all hers. So I wouldn't even buy that argument on scientific grounds. And even if it was her DNA, it's now in another person. So no, I don't believe that. I don't believe children are property. So I would reject that argument.
Gotcha. Okay. Anyone want to hop in and start talking about abortion-y things?
I'd add before, because I may have to go in maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but I would add before we go, as I said before, the levels of arbitrariness that hypothetical removes is a good way to sort of, measure what people are willing to go for abortions. I would add, though, that like a lot of the things, even though the great points, like Quaid, for example, he brought up great points as well. Quaid brought up, women don't have a safety net in America. In Europe they do, which is a very good argument. And I think if we did have that in America, would we see a big change? Is something worth talking about, because I don't think it would change. I think it's more of a consumer-based life, materialistic way of being. And I'm not a communist, okay? So, I identify some trends in America that are quite relevant. I think if you say to me, I'm going to grow up in an environment where I'm going to be poor and my parents are going to hate me, if I was in a blank room with God and he gave me the button, for some strange hypothetical, I would press the button and definitely be born, because it's still better than non-life, right? It's just an objective observation. It's better than non-life. To suffer, I think, is to live, and to live is to suffer. But there's more things in life than just those things, So I wouldn't say that is a non-arbitrary standard. It wouldn't be an objective standard to say poverty is a good form of prevention to justify abortion. So that's just me.
Gotcha.
Well, and to be clear, though, I wasn't just talking about the quality of life of the child, although that's part of it, but also the quality of life of the parents, like how and their other children, because again, the majority of abortions, at least in this country, are, and I think it's probably true across the board, they already have children, and it's the other children who are probably going to suffer more, because now there is another mouth to feed, there is another person to support. So it has an impact on everybody. It affects many lives. So I think that's worth considering as well. But and I can't say I totally agree that I think that living is always better than non-living. I mean, I kind of agree. I heard Sam Harris say one time that if you can't imagine a situation where it would be better to not be alive than to be alive, then you haven't thought about it hard enough. I don't mean that as an insult, but
No,
really,
I agree. I agree to some extent.
like
Yeah.
for instance, if you were treated the way that we treat animals on factory farms, if you were forced to be in a cage your entire life in your own shit, I think you might wish for death. You might.
I think we have like an inbuilt instinct, right, to want death regardless. I think you have to be psychologically broken to prefer death, even in the worst scenarios. I think that's a fact. In psychology, you have to be very psychologically warped to prefer life.
I think you have to just be faced with the scenario where on continued existence, it just is unthinkable.
I'd say we have no other choice for sure. Like, we don't have a choice in choosing. That's the best way to go.
It does seem like most animals, humans and non-humans, have this instinct to live, even no matter what the worst situations are. If a fox has its leg in a like a one of those traps, it'll like chew its leg off to get out. And so I think, but obviously, clearly, and I don't know if this is outside of humans, there is suicide. And I think that seems to be more of a mental state based off a situation that society can bring on. I don't know if there are animals that would commit suicide.
There are plenty of humans who commit suicide because they don't want to be in pain. Doesn't have to be some psychological.
Oh, fair point. Yeah, like if I was a quadriplegic, I'm pretty sure, and I could be wrong, this is just me guessing, I would want to have something injected in me that just makes me never wake up. But yeah, no, I agree. There could be levels of suffering of like having a late stage cancer and various different things. It's possible that if you could tell factory farmed animals like. If you press this button, your life will just be over in a snap. Like a lot of them might do it. I don't know how much instinct. I was just pointing out. It seems that there is an instinct within humans,
Yes.
Probably not fetuses, but with humans and animals, like most fully developed animals, that they want to stay alive. I don't know why I was pointing that out, but
It's an ironic statement, I think, to say what I said for sure. But I think we have no choice as life to choose life. And to reject life, as Quaid says, is, sometimes justifiable if your conditions are really bad and you feel strongly about it. But I do think that people choose that when they're in they're going to die anyway, right? So, like, if you're sick and you have cancer, your life's on decline, your nutrition, mental health is on decline. So that it tends to just lean towards death anyway. But when we're trapped and when we're ready to go, I think life always spirals forwards. You know, we're animated objects pretty much in terms of physics, you know, and we always want to move and keep going forward. When there's something that stops us, we just lose all motion, right? We lose all energy.
I want to ask you one more question before you head out of here. And then once you head out of here, Quaid and Isaac, if you guys are okay with staying around for a few minutes,
Sure.
I have one more question to ask you guys about a different topic. It's about dog attacks.
Sure.
My favorite thing to do, aside from close my eyes and philosophize about all this stuff, is to play devil's advocate as extreme as I can against myself. And so when it comes to abortion, one thing that I always say, and I'm curious to hear if Cavasir would agree, if I was on an island and I was with 100 babies, and I magically knew that, or maybe not magically knew, but I had a very good feeling that I could only keep 15 alive, because that's all I had food for, was myself and 15 of them. If I had a bunch of little tiny pills that would make somebody just painlessly die, I would put 85 of those pills in 85 random baby mouths. Maybe I'd pick out the cutest babies or whatever and then do away with the ugly one. But anyways, I would do away with 85 of them if I knew I could only keep 15 alive. I wouldn't try to save them all and take this risk or whatever. So this is kind of my example of, in the right cases, I'm very pro-choice. If back in the day somebody, people couldn't keep their babies alive, they might have to take them out. Or if somebody was pregnant and they knew that if that baby was born, it was just going to suffer and have a miserable life because there were no resources and whatnot, I would want that person to, I wouldn't stop that person from aborting their baby. And so I think when we decide in the cases that we think a society should be pro-life legally, it would have a lot to do with outcomes and resources and all these kinds of things. And I don't want to make any claims right now that we necessarily have that in the U.S. or anything, but I think that's a factor. So Cavasir, before you head out of here, would you give those not abortion pills, but just fall asleep and never wake up pills to 85 of those babies? Or do you have such a strong life stance that you would try to keep them all alive and just do your best?
Personally, I think we mentioned this before. I would, if God magically come down, hypothetical, and said these babies are going to die, choose a certain amount of them that survive. I suppose I would, because I'm in.
Well, what if a God didn't tell you? What if you're just deciding with your own mind?
I would, objectively speaking, because I have biases, or we all have biases that are programmed into us. Pick the ones that I think are going to be the cutest, like you said, or the best, or whatever grabs my biases, I will select. So 15, I would choose 15 over the rest, because I know I could keep them alive. Gotcha. Whereas if I spread resources across, they may all die. But
and I think this is a good opposite of that hypothetical about in the future in a facility. Yeah. It's to make sure that people are being reasonable. Not that I mean any offense, but if somebody is pro-life and they say that they would risk the suffering of all 100 instead of taking out 85, then their stance is so cemented in that I would think they're not thinking about it. So I'm glad you had the right stance.
No, it's a perfectly reasonable thing. I think if they can't answer that with common sense, it's just not worth having a debate at that point where they
it was good talking. If you got to head out, no worries. I'm just going to ask these guys some other questions. But
take care, guys. It was great.
Good talk. Take care. Have a nice day.
Thank you guys. Take care.
Okay, so Isaac, this question's to you, and then same thing to Quaid, or you could respond to Isaac or whatever. But I was talking to a couple people yesterday about our society project, and if there should be laws protecting. So basically, imagine yourself you're at a park, and a large dog, we'll say pit bulls for right now, a pit bull's charging at you. It could be charging at you to lick your face. It could be charging at you to end your life. But you have a gun on you, and in our society, we haven't really talked about guns much, but let's just say that they're acceptable to have. If somebody saw a pit bull charging at them and they're just making their own choice that they're claiming that they felt their life is at risk and they shoot the dog, would you say that this should be acceptable if we were writing laws about this in our society?
I'm leaning towards yes, or that, yeah, especially like, and this is like, because I feel like it's the owner of the dog should be in charge of like having that dog on a leash and stuff. And if they're not going to take those precautions, then yeah, the health of that animal is, they're basically foregoing it. And so, and yeah, I do think that, especially if it was clearly aggressive, it's like barking and stuff when it's coming at you, then definitely. If it's just like, if it looks happy and it's just like, so maybe like the demeanor of the dog would have an impact for me.
Like if there was security footage and the person
Yeah.
said that they thought their life was at risk, but then the jury can see that the dog looks happy, that would play a part for you.
Yeah. Or if you like have like a dog treat or something in your hand and it's like, it just wants that or something. So like, but yeah, for me, I'm leaning towards, though, could definitely be justified. So
Okay. And then real quick before we have Quaid answer it, let's imagine it was a small dog that has never killed an adult human in its life, but it's known for looking aggressive and being aggressive. Let's imagine a Chihuahua with like foam coming out of its mouth and it looks like crazy aggressive, but that we can just know in our society, which I doubt an adult has ever been killed by a Chihuahua, that it should not be permitted to ever shoot a Chihuahua charging at you.
I'm not sure. I feel like I don't know, like, because even if it can't kill you, it can still bite you. It can still harm you.
Interesting. Okay.
Like,
yeah, fair point.
So I'm not like, even if it was like, a mouse or a hamster, right? I think that it could possibly be justified, where I think because it's, for me, it's not an issue of you're protecting your life. It's you're just stopping yourself from being harmed.
Okay.
So
Yeah. Okay. So, Quaid, thoughts on the pit bull, and then if you have different thoughts on Chihuahua or mouse.
Right. One of the things I hate reading about the most are the many stories we see about police officers just shooting dogs, and they always claim that the dog is aggressive or it's charging them. When I think in many of these cases, you couldn't honestly make that claim. Like a golden retriever or a Labrador type of dog, just kind of running up to greet, and they just shoot it dead. And that happens all the time, unfortunately. So I think it's interesting that you specify those breeds. I went on a walk the other day. Somebody had Rottweilers. They were on a leash, but it was like a small person with two very big dogs on a leash. And I'm walking by and I'm thinking, what if they just let that leash go? They were big, mean-looking dogs. So, I mean, look, I always think that we have a basic right to self-defense, to self-preservation, and I'm uncomfortable putting too many restrictions on that. I don't think we're obligated to allow ourselves to just be mortally harmed for some ethical reason. We have a right to protect ourselves, but at the same time, I think chances are. Part of the problem too is you brought up foaming at the mouth, and maybe you were thinking of rabies. Most of the time, we can't tell just by looking at an animal whether it has rabies. A hyper aggressive animal may have rabies, so like a hyper aggressive Chihuahua, because they're not usually like aggressive, like wanting to bite you and stuff. But if they are, maybe they have rabies. Rabies is fatal, unless it's like treated immediately or something like that. So. It's a dicey situation, but I think in most situations, though, if you're just out and about and a dog is coming up to you, it probably doesn't pose a threat, unless it's like if it's charging you, like a Rottweiler or a pit bull is charging you, that okay, you might have some justification there. Whereas if a dog is just kind of happily scampering up to you, I think there's a little bit of common sense here, which I don't see in these police shootings of dogs, like. Everyone I've seen, it's like a little bit of common sense,
Yeah.
There was no murder that dog, but I haven't seen any ones where it's like a big dog charging them with clear and aggressive intent. It's just a household pet, and they just blow it away, without a second thought. And it's like that. I see too much of that, and I definitely think that is wrong, and that should be punished. I think probably you got to take these on a case by case basis. I don't know if there is a one law
Yeah.
situation.
I always feel like I have a separation in my mind of what I would recommend or what I would do myself versus what I think the limitations of what should be legal should be. And so I could say I wouldn't want somebody to go to jail for a long amount of time if they truly thought their lives were at danger because a Rottweiler was charging at them and they shot it, where I might tell myself, you know what? I don't want to kill this dog, so I'm going to take the risk and I'm going to hopefully be able to overpower it with my arms, but I wouldn't. So anyways, when it comes to the laws and the society thing, I always like to think of what should be permitted, and should the citizens feel like they don't have to take this risk of I'm going to defend myself, but I might go to jail for a long time. So it's good for citizens to be able to know what their rights are and what the limits are.
Yeah, well, if we took this more seriously, we don't right now. I mean, cops are never disciplined for this stuff. Maybe they can be sued or whatever, but if we took this more seriously, then yeah, I mean, I'd want to say, were there witnesses? Is it on camera? Some people have an irrational fear of dogs and animals in general, but like of dogs, like people in my family, I know there's a few who like even a happy, friendly dog will just freak out, and they might feel like their life is threatened, by a dog that 99% of other people recognize as friendly and non-aggressive. And in that case, I don't care about your irrational fear. I think we do have to, like, that's a you problem,
Yeah.
That's not something that we should be accommodating, like you should still pay a price for that. So I think I would want to have the same standards of evidence and, the same due process, but right now we just don't care. It's like, just a dog.
Well, so I just made a note about police shooting dogs because one thing we're going to do a lot more in this project, the society project, is get panels of us together, watch like body cam footage or cell phone footage of police interactions, and then decide like what we think the law should be and how that situation should play out in court. And I think it could be interesting to find a police shooting a dog video that might be leaning more towards the justified side, and then a police shooting a dog that isn't justified. And then we can write law about, in this case, should this officer be fired? Should they actually face legal troubles because of what they did?
They don't even give these families a chance to like get their dog in another room, control their animal, it's just gun out, dead.
And that could be part of the policy when we, as a society group, write what the police policy should be. It would be, in this scenario, let the family try to do this and that kind of thing.
And this is one of the reasons I'd prefer just to not allow dog ownership, but
gotcha.
Well, yeah. So that was a whole other question, right? Like, I'm definitely against breeding mills. We should not be breeding pets at all. But there's still going to be a lot of strays. There's still going to be a lot of pets that need rescuing in homes. In the meantime, I'd like to phase it out. But between
if
now and then,
the government could,
I don't like to consider them like my property. I mean, they're our house. They're members of our household.
yeah.
But yeah, I don't think people should be buying and selling pets and animals like that as pets for sure.
Would you be in favor of if the government was able to have a huge piece of land that could be like a sanctuary for dogs, and then all dogs had to be spayed and neutered and taken here and, get fed, maybe even a really nice healthy for dogs vegan diet or something, or even if it's not a vegan diet or whatever, put in this land, and then they die off naturally and then there's no dogs anymore? Or would you be against that?
No, I think I'd be okay with that. I mean, I don't think we have a right to have these animals, in our lives at our beck and call. I think we all have an obligation to, well, I don't know if I want to say obligation, but I mean, I think it's okay to rescue. We should be rescuing animals who need our help and our support, but that's, that's different than this sense of entitlement. I have a right. I want my children to see the miracle of life, or something like that. I don't think we have an absolute right to own these beings. So yeah, I would be okay with that. I mean, what the same thing we're going to do if we ever got to the point where we ended factory farming, like all those animals, I would say they need to be in a sanctuary. They need to be on a big plot of land, and they all need to be spayed and neutered, and we don't need to breed anymore. That would be it, because we don't have a right to that. Now we could allow some back into the wild, I guess. There are some ecosystems that would probably, like, if we restore ecosystems to what they should be, for instance, maybe there's a way to like reintegrate them into the wild to some extent, but we're talking about billions and billions of animals here. So I don't think we're going to send them all back to the wild. So whatever we don't send back into the wild, they should be comfortable for the rest of their lives, but they should be sterilized, and just that should be it.
Gotcha. Okay, let's do a couple more things if you guys are up for it. Isaac here is the most vegan non-vegan I know. So Isaac here is not vegan. So I want to ask him a question because he basically anti-factory farming, maybe anti-farming altogether, even regenerative farming, but not against the idea of people being able to go hunting and eat meat and whatnot. If we were to rewild cows out into, let's say, the forest or something of the U.S., and they were just out there reproducing on their own, and they'd just like deer, they might be the prey of something like mountain lions or whatever. Are there any animals that would be out in the wild that a human is up for eating that you would be against the hunting of?
I think only for cases where there's like a concern for extinction or something like that. But yeah, aside from that, I don't really have any issues with any particular species. So it's just as long as that species is healthy and happy, then
Okay.
that's what I care about.
Quaid, do you have if we outlawed factory farming and even regenerative farming, just basically all farming, fencing in animals and then raising them and breeding them to be eaten and whatnot. Let's say we outlawed all that and the only consumption of animals, which it probably wouldn't be, there wouldn't be enough for the amount of people that would probably want to eat wild deer and boar and stuff like that. But if the only thing left was hunting, would you want to make it illegal if you were a lawmaker for a society to go hunting?
Yeah, this is a question that often comes up, and you're not letting me wiggle out of this one, because usually what I say is, like, right now I don't care about hunting that much. It's on the list of priorities well below factory farming. Well, okay, so we've reached the day. We've gotten rid of factory farms. Now what do we do about the hunting? I mean, look, I think if we have, I hate putting conditions on it, but these two conditions are different to me. The condition where we haven't developed lab-based meat alternatives, and the condition where we have. Like, if we haven't developed that yet, and there are still people who, I mean, look, there are people who insist that they need meat for their diets. They need it to be healthy. I mean, the carnivore movement is kind of taking off, and well, I think it's misguided. I think those conditions are very rare. I don't think it is essential for human health. But I realize that some people are just very almost religiously convinced of that, and nothing is going to persuade them otherwise. And in those cases, I'd be like, okay, maybe some limited amount of hunting, because that can also, preserve balances of populations out in the wild too. I mean, I know sometimes there has to be culling or whatever, but like, if we've moved far enough along where we've got the meat substitutes that are, and I'm not talking about like Beyond Burgers, I'm talking about it's grown in a lab, the lab cultured meat, right? Fermented meat, whatever you want to call it. Then yeah, I absolutely, at that point, I think, yeah, outlaw hunting. Except, I mean, I would always make an exception for like remote indigenous communities that maybe they're not going to have access to lab meat or whatever. But like,
Mhm.
you know, anyone who has access to lab meat, there's no need. There's now no need for you to go out and hunt and kill, you know, for that meat that you claim that you absolutely need for your diet. Okay, you know, now you can have it, lab grown meat. So there's no reason why hunting should be allowed at that point, and especially
Gotcha.
certainly we should not be allowing the hunting of elephants or dolphins or whales like that. That's got to go. These are highly intelligent species that, apart from them being endangered, you know, if any species have a claim to a right to exist, it'd be those. But yeah, there'd be no need. There'd be no need for that under those conditions. And I don't accept as legitimate the conspiracy theories that it's like, oh, you're eating cancer or there's 5G in it and Bill Gates is going to control your brain if you eat lab grown. I mean, that's just bullshit. I don't accept that as
For sure.
legitimate. That I'm not going to entertain. I'll go so far as to believe that you need meat, even though I don't really believe that you do, but not going to buy into the 5G and the bloodstream stuff. So.
Gotcha. Okay, well, let me see if anything pops into your head for maybe a possible proposal we could have for the society, animal based but not farm based. So we have already outlawed animal shows where dogs get ribbons for hopping over stuff. We've outlawed animal racing. We outlawed pet selling. And then it's kind of interesting. We outlawed the owning of snakes, but we didn't outlaw the owning of cats or birds. I thought birds would go through, but that did not. I'm curious. We also just barely did not outlaw riding horses. So it by one vote, it was accepted to keep riding horses for certain professions. Can you think of something that's not related to farmed animals that is animal based that should be brought up as a proposal for the society project?
Animal testing.
Okay, animal testing. Assuming that it wouldn't all pass, like that some people might think that it's okay to test on a monkey to cure cancer or something like that. Is there any specific animal testing that you think is the worst animal testing or the most useless? Or do you think there shouldn't be a single element of animal testing?
Well, I mean, there are always degrees, right? But every animal testing scenario that I've ever read about sounded just horrific. So I'd be more inclined to just a blanket ban. And
Okay.
if there's a piece of technology or an advancement that we can only make by torturing animals, well, I'm sorry, humanity, you're just gonna have to do without it. I don't care.
I agree. I think we should test on willing humans. I know there's a lot of animal tests for to see how certain types of things like Tylenol will affect stomach or something like that, and they'll test on rats. And I think if humans are willing to, similar to humans donating blood or plasma or whatever, if they're willing to be the guinea pigs. Now, there is an ethical complication where if they're being paid to and they're homeless or whatever, it's a bummer to test on people in that way. But I would prefer human testing where the human agrees to it than I would just testing on like mice, monkeys, that kind of thing.
It's that important. We can offer significant financial incentives for people to willingly agree, you know, and I wouldn't target homeless people. I think holding that over their head is wrong.
Of course.
You know, but in general, we could provide sufficient incentives to make people want to do it voluntarily and just, we're not going to torture animals anymore. By the way, if and when people bring up, when they accuse you as a vegan of anthropomorphizing animals, well, I always just bring up animal testing. Like we don't hear those arguments when you want to test something on an animal because they're enough like us that supposedly these tests are going to show us something important, and it's usually has to do with pain. How much is this going to hurt? How sick is this going to make them? So they're enough like us when you want to exploit them, and torture them, for some human benefit. But then as soon as we start talking about factory farming or something else, oh, well, now you're anthropomorphizing. Humans aren't animals. No, you're anthropomorphizing. Yeah. Bullshit. They're enough. Yeah. You know full well that they're enough like us to justify in your mind animal testing, and you don't get to pull that back when we're talking about food production. So I just thought as an aside, I thought I'd bring that up.
Oh, for sure. No, I'm with you. Isaac, are you still there?
I am.
Okay, your video was gone. Do you agree? Would you vote to completely outlaw animal testing, or are there areas of testing that you are accepting of?
There's areas of testing that I'm accepting of. For me, if
Okay.
it's like to cure cancer, I'd be completely okay with it. And I mean, in general, if I generally want to treat animals the best possible, but if there is enough of a incentive for human well-being that isn't that we can do it for not that much harm, I think it's completely okay. And this is where I'm okay with like service dogs. I'm okay with police dogs and stuff like that. So this is a spot I think that we should try to keep to a minimum. We definitely shouldn't be doing it for stuff like makeup
Makeup?
products or yeah. But I think that if it's to test for some medical stuff for like some serious condition, I think it's completely okay.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I think we should just try a blanket ban at first, and then if it doesn't go through, then we'd just have to go with individual things. The fact that people can still test makeups and shampoos and stuff like that on bunnies blows my mind. It's like,
Yeah.
get a couple humans in there and see if their eyes are irritated by the chemicals we're putting in our soap, or get some soap that's already been tested and you don't need new products. I just cannot believe they're tested on animals.
Yeah, I don't give a shit about whatever benefits you're going to get from it. I just don't.
Yeah. Well, what if it was so right now we know that we haven't cured cancer or anything, but what if testing on 1,000 something or others led to the cure of cancer, and then you were asked, like, would you rather that go back in time and that didn't have happened and that suffering didn't exist, and then we'll figure out cancer down the road a little bit, or
If it's that important, well, would you just torture a human to death to cure cancer? I mean, so when it comes to a human, we'll let a million other humans die of cancer because we won't torture one human, but we will torture 10 million rabbits or monkeys or whatever.
yeah.
I mean, I just, if something is that important that you're willing to torture animals over, why wouldn't you just torture a human over it if it's that important? Why all of a sudden become a hard ass, an ethical hard ass when we're just talking about, hey, 1 or 2 humans maybe?
Yeah. It is really complicated.
Yeah, and for me, I care more about human suffering than I do animal suffering, just in general, because I think that I've talked about this before. I just think that there's a much greater capacity to suffer because humans are able to. There's this whole intellectual side of human suffering that I don't think is there with animal suffering, and a massive like social element. And so, I do care a lot more about human suffering, but I do think that it is an interesting question for me of like how many animals would I be okay killing to take cancer, or not killing but testing on, like, because I don't know if I'd be okay with 10 million rabbits like you said, but 10 rabbits, like, absolutely. So
Well, let's take the intellect out of it. What if it's just like a 2-year-old child, no intellect there, but a child?
yeah, and yeah, like honestly, I'd probably be more okay with doing testing on like a baby or something, because I don't think that a baby has developed that.
I appreciate the honest answer. I mean, I wouldn't be okay with any of it, but yeah, that's more. Well, that is the least consistent. I mean, because a lot of animals, not a lot. I mean, rabbits, I wouldn't say, but pigs have the cognition, the psychological and cognitive capacities of like a 3-year-old human child. I mean, they've shown that the pigs can play video games. I mean, they're very intelligent, and we subject them to horrific cruelty. Rabbits, I'm not so sure what their intelligence level is. They undoubtedly suffer, but like, yeah, I think if we're talking about but if the gain from torturing 1 human was to cure 1 million humans of cancer, I mean, why wouldn't you do? I mean, if it's that important, that's what I'm saying. Like really, so like an adult human that could have this intellectual suffering, that one person's life, that's precious, and you wouldn't you would not torture that person to cure a million other humans, but you would maybe experiment on a baby or something like that to cure that million humans, or what. Because like me personally, if I really thought it was that important, I don't see why the dimension of suffering, the extent of suffering would even matter that much, because there's a million lives on the line. Why not just torture the adult human with the full range of capacities? And I mean, like why wouldn't you, to save a million lives? I'm just curious.
And I still do think that it would be worth one human life or whatever, to do it there, but I would rather do it on animals if given the option, just because I think that it would be better to cause suffering to animals than it would be to humans.
Or babies.
Yeah.
Wade, would you? You've probably been asked this question a billion times because you're vegan. If there's a burning building, dog, and a person, you save the person?
If assuming I didn't know anything about, all I knew about them was that it was a dog.
Yeah,
and
you either know nothing or you know that both the dog and the person are both vegan.
But on the whole, I would say the human, yes.
Okay. And then I'm sure Isaac, with the same type of question, if it took a human offering to be tested on that could even lead to their death versus 10,000 dogs being tested on, I'm guessing you'd go with in that case, the person?
Yeah, probably. There's definitely a gray area. I don't know where I would switch to the animals, because if it was like 100 dogs, or then it's harder. But for 10,000, I think I would rather one human.
Okay. If you could detect the level of suffering and the suffering was like 5 times as much with the animal, because I'm with you that, like, since I don't know for sure if animals have like a want or will for the future or a desire to live. If somebody was just to be snapped out of existence, I'd prefer an animal snapped out of existence than a human, because one thing that I desire myself, and that I imagine other humans do, is this desire to live. And but if it wasn't about just living or not existing, if it was just about the pure suffering, and you could detect it in numbers, you had units of suffering, it would be really hard to care more about 1 unit of human suffering compared to like 100 units of animal suffering.
And yeah, I think that if there was a way to do that objectively, like, that would be ideal. And then we could just always find out, and maybe there's like some species that's ideal that doesn't suffer as much as other animals. And so, but yeah, I think that that would be a great system, and then you could find out. But I don't think that it's ever going to be possible to know that for sure. So
For sure.
maybe I'm wrong.
We might not be able to quantify it that precisely, but I mean, we do know that different species have different biological equipment. I mean, vertebrates versus invertebrates. Having a central nervous system, things like that. So I think we can kind of do, like, there's still debate over insect sentience, and anti-vegans like to try to troll us with, what about all the insects were killed, during harvests or pesticides and things like that for your tofu, which, by the way, is that's like 7% of the soy crops go to like human consumption. Most of it's going to animal feed, but whatever, we'll set that aside. They're like, what about the insects? I'm like, well, the science on insect sentience is not, there's still there's a lot of gray areas there. We're not entirely sure the extent to which they are sentient or not, whereas we are when it comes to vertebrates, and especially mammals. Certainly the animals that are factory farmed, like we know plenty about their levels of sentience and cognition. And there's been plenty of behavioral studies, psychological studies, done on that. So we can be reasonably confident about the extent to which they suffer, and that's kind of diminished the further away from humanity you get. The further away the species is on the tree of life, I guess. the less sure we can be. But we will eventually have more answers on all of these things.
Yeah, and I think that's
I probably got to hop off here in a sec. Do you guys want me to leave this running with you guys talking, or do you guys want to wrap it up in the next couple?
I gotta grab some lunch. But,
Okay. Yeah, Isaac, what were you gonna say, and then we can hop off right after that.
Oh yeah, just talking about, for me, like how close they are on like the evolutionary tree to humans is part of it, but at the same time, I think that, you know, we should still be like concerned about other things like even like trees, and especially with like AI on their ability to suffer, because, you know, even if they can't right now, I still think that they could evolve the ability, and I think AI at some point almost certainly will be able to suffer, and so yeah, I think that. Yeah, and you're definitely right that like we can have a much better idea of like mammals compared to insects, and that's part of why, like, I think I've gone on record, but I'll say it again, that I'm completely okay with like factory farming insects. I think that would be fine. So, but yeah, obviously I think that, but to me they're like barely even animals. Like they're and maybe there's some that are much smarter and much more able to suffer, and we can find that out and do a case by case basis. But yeah, so I'm definitely not, you know, to me, like even like the lines of mammals and reptiles and stuff, like it isn't what I am going to be judging it by, or so for me, or even, yeah, if it's physically there, because I still think that, you know, we can be morally obligated to not cause an AI to suffer. So
I agree with that last point. I'll just leave it there.
Awesome. Well, it was a great talk, and hopefully we'll all get together again soon and have another talk.
Yeah, anytime.
Awesome. All right,
Sweet.
you guys take care.
see ya.
Take care.